We're here with Mr. Robert Tauber. Please, Mr. Tauber, introduce yourself.
Well, I retired from Ohio State University and came to Florida in 2015 after almost 30 years, and was director of the Logan Elm Press and Paper Mill, the Book Arts Lab at Ohio State, where I taught classes in all the different arts of the book: printing, typography, binding. But I'm a dinosaur. We did all our work by hand. We made our paper by hand, both Western and Oriental papers. We made, we didn't cast type, although I have done that. But we used metal and wood type, and we used contemporary plate making techniques, photographic processes, some very old photographic processes, gravure and collotype, which is ink to paper photographic reproduction methods, dating back to the beginning of photography. And I did this with students and faculty alike and members of the community at large.
And this was books as art. So it's a multifaceted discipline of art where you have the literature part of it, you have the technical book making, but then you also have a conceptual sculpture kind of quality and a whole
think of a book like an opera, where you have libretto, you have the lyrics, of course, you have music, you have stage design, you have acting, you have lighting, you have all of that. In the book arts, you have letter forms, both handwritten and cast metal forms that you reproduce onto paper, in our case handmade papers from many different fiber types. Plus you have binding and the different kinds of bindings, and you have watermarking of the paper, you have calligraphy, marbling and paste paper making for papers used for overboard for bindings. Let's see, typography, binding, paper making, and printing, all the different printing styles, and printmaking, etching, engraving, lithography, silkscreen, all of these different techniques and materials that can be assembled in one way or another under the guidance of an artist, a designer, an illustrator, a binder. And usually when we did books, you have to think first about how we're going to bind this thing, because the concept of the book really depends a lot on how you're going to put it together. And you can't design a book and print it and then say, oh gee, how we're going to bind it. So I learned early on that you have to think about how you're going to end up, what kind of structure that book's going to be.
You have to really have a vision of the whole project in its entirety.
That's right. Just like the binding is to an opera, of a book is to what the stages to a opera. It's going to be performed somewhere. Is it outdoors? Is it indoors? Does your stage go around? Does it move? Does it, all kinds of questions.
And there's a lot of clever executions, I would imagine, kind of like this, the note in the bottle book you brought with you.
Right.
It's kind of like, I think of almost when you talk about the theater reference, Phantom of the Opera starts a theater within a theater, and then it's kind of revealed to the bigger picture. So you have a lot of clever ways to interpret books.
Well, that's right. And in my case, remember, we have students, and I'm engaged with faculty, and the lab is a collaborative space, a workshop or atelier where many different people come and collaborate on projects, the inspiration for which can be, you never know where that's going to come from. I brought an example of a project we did called A Letter of Columbus, and this book was inspired from a letter that was given to me, the translation in English, from the original Spanish letter that was the first correspondence from Columbus back to the Old World on his maiden voyage heading back home to announce his discovery. And it was like landing on the moon. Columbus was known as the modern Prometheus, that he'd discover Eden. It was such a major discovery, like landing on the moon. It was a very popular letter. It had been published in many formats in the 1493, the year he returned. in Latin, in Italian, as poetry, not to mention its first printing was in Spanish. But so that we celebrated in 1992 the quincentenary of the Columbus discovery of the Americas, and so we did a project based on that letter.
The historical artifact, and then now you've kind of created that's your concept, and then on that you've got all these layers of the different disciplines contributing to this.
Well, it was the inspiration.
Right.
And we brought together an artist, a calligrapher, a paper maker, and I worked with a binder. Although we had volunteers and students who helped execute the entire project, the artist, as a matter of fact, Anthony Rice, that illustrated this poem, it ended up a long poem, the letter cast off as a poem, was a teacher at Ringling School of Art and Design here in Sarasota, who I had collaborated with before on a couple of books. And when I approached him and asked him if he wanted to do that project, he was quite excited. And we brought him up to Columbus, Ohio, to Ohio State for a little over a month, put him up, fed him, and every day he came to the shop and worked with some assistants who volunteered, students and some other volunteers, to hand paint basically every copy.
I would think as an artist, which I would not consider myself an artist, I like to dabble in doing artistic things, but for an artist, like you said, he was excited. I could see why they would be excited, because there's so much depth to the project, and it's such a collaborative effort that it's just exciting. It's almost ridiculously complex in its conception and execution.
Well, we make it a little easier for people to appreciate by putting at the end of almost every book I've ever published, printed and published, we have in the back what's known as a colophon. This tells the story of the book that you're holding in your hand. Who did it, when, why, what the type was, what the paper is, and everything. And this has a watermark. I don't think we can see it real easily here.
We'll get some
but I don't think you can. But there's a watermark portrait of Columbus in one corner, and in the other corner there's a dove or a bird with a branch in its mouth is the other watermark that we made.
So what he's holding up here is, it's a book as you would think, but the paper was made by hand.
All of it from Spanish flax.
All the typeset was laid by hand and rolled
and printed.
A lot of art in the book itself.
The title page, for instance, has some gold leaf on it. It also has hand lettering. This black title is all hand lettered by Analia Woods, who's the calligrapher on the project. And she did 11 initial letters by hand in every copy.
Wow.
Every copy. And then this illustration of the elephant, there's an elephant with a serpent and a dragon. And that's from the Chinese, it's based on the Chinese creation myth. And it's on the title page because, Columbus thought he was going to China. Mm-hmm. And then there are lines, these lines on the title page, maybe you can see, that crisscross. Those look like they are nautical, one would think. But actually, they are the basis for the ideal book. And they describe where and how the text block is supposed to sit on the page. And it's part of the design of the book.
That's a little inside joke.
Yes, it's a pun almost, really.
Right.
And the binding, these stitchings here, this is called a long stitch, which shows the stitching is exhibited on the outside of the book, so we're not hidden. You see it? That's supposed to represent all the different lines, and the stitching is on the outside of the book. rather than on the inside. And so it represents the stays and all the ropes that go on a ship, just like a ship. And so there's a lot of symbolism throughout the book. Like here, the book starts with an initial letter. It's what's called a historiated initial letter, and it's made up of a horse and a watermelon. The watermelon being the crossbar on the letter H for the word highnesses, which is the first word in the long letter or poem, prose poem. And
there's a lot of sense of humor in the whole
thing. It is. There is. There's even more. I'll tell you a couple other ones. But this, it represents the fact that the horse had pretty much disappeared from the Americas. Columbus, and followed by, after Columbus, Cortez and others brought the horse to the Americas for the first time. And the watermelon was brought back by him to Europe. They had no watermelons. So it represents that exchange of civilizations. And then throughout the book, we have all these illustrations. So the type here is hand set and printed. We dampened the paper and printed it all by hand. And the lettering, the initial letters for each page, is hand-drawn in each book. And here's a shark. Now these are monoprints, which means the way this is printed is the artist paints on a metal plate, the sheet's printed, and then the artist has to paint again. There are some marks on the plate that carry some of the image from one printing to the next, but by and large, the colors and a lot of the marks are created and then they have to be done by hand again. So this book, when it was created, was done much the way books were done at the very beginning of printing. When only thing that was printed was the type. Everything else still had to be done by hand. The paper made by hand, the binding by hand, the illustrations and initial letters, all still done by hand. Right?
Incredible.
And the concept for this book was based on the fact that Columbus kept two versions of the ship's log. One was he kept in secret, and the other he showed to the crew. And so he had one, he lied in one of them because the crew got nervous that they were never going to see land and they would never get back again. They were scared. Anyway, he finishes his letter, but then he added a postscript a month later to the letter before he sent it back to Spain, because he stopped in Portugal to see the king and queen of Portugal, where he had gone first for the money to get ships built. And they turned him down, and so he went to Spain and got him from Queen Isabella. But he stopped in Portugal to see if he could get some money to go back. They turned him down again. And he made a beeline back to Spain, but not before which he wrote to Queen Isabella saying, "I'm sorry, I was delayed because of bad weather." It wasn't true. But we put this map in here as a separation between the main part of the letter and the postscript. And in the corner, in red lettering, in Chinese calligraphy, it says "secret map." And it's supposed to represent his way to China that he carried with him. But this copy represents his copy that he kept for himself and doodled the pictures in the margins that he wasn't showing anybody else.
Is that a different artist than that did all the illustrations on the pages?
All the illustrations on the pages here and the map were done by Anthony Rice, who's still teaching, I believe, at Ringling.
Wow.
I think he's taught there over 40 years.
Incredible.
He's a good printmaker and good artist. And the postscript is quite interesting. And here we have, for instance, in this illustration, a bird and a picture of the moon reflected in the water. And the bird is like one of those birds you see on the beach that goes back and forth, and they leave those little bird's feet marks in the sand. And this image represents the idea that the bird marks are like stars in the heaven.
Yeah.
So
it's the whole thing's so clever. And it's so
and here we've bent
incredible.
the foredge of the binding, this is called a yap. So when you shut your book, you shut your yap. And that's actually a term from a man named Yap. And it used to be that old books would have this yap and then a little bone and a hook here that would keep it shut.
Yes.
The box we made, this box, the paper we made from an anchor rope.
Wow.
Big, thick, about a 3.5, 4-inch thick anchor sisal hemp rope that we had to cook and lye twice and wash it and then beat it to pulp. And then we made a paste paper that shows a bird with a branch in its mouth and waves, ocean waves.
How was that put on there?
On this paper?
Yeah.
It's a goo we make with paint and what do you call it? A little binder, like in a little acrylic. And then we had a rubber stamp of a bird, and we had a big brush. And we would slop this on the paper. Then one of the students would make the wave mark, and the other would come along with the stamps and put them on the with the rubber stamp.
Wow.
We made the rubber stamp.
Yeah. Well, of course.
Yeah.
And what's that little medallion on the front or whatever that
And there's an inlaid bas-relief, hand-cast paper bas-relief of the title page imagery of the elephant with the dragon and the serpent. Because the idea of the Chinese creation myth is that the universe sits on the back of an elephant, and the serpent, it represents time. And when the dragon slays the serpent, the blood becomes the heavens, and the flesh of the serpent becomes the firmament, and begins time.
So the detail is not only on the creation and the execution of it and the skill of it, but the details got to be right too. You got to have
everything's got to line up. Everything has to line up.
As a bookmaker, you have to be obviously very knowledgeable about history because you got to get it right every time you make a book. Is that something you were passionate about or learned by?
Publishing is, used to be a gentleman's game because, every time I do a book, I learn about something that I knew nothing about. I didn't know anything about Columbus to speak of until we did this book, and then I learned an awful lot.
Did a deep dive for the project.
You find yourself becoming a real dilettante.
Well, you've retained quite a bit of it, so every time you
so
make
far,
a book,
so good.
Every time you make a book, you've kind of had a download of a whole other branch of history.
Well, I'm just hitting the tip of the iceberg. I mean, ask. If you really want to know, a friend used to say, ask Bob Tauber the time, he'll give you the history of the clock. So I got to be careful. You got to watch what you wish for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
My wife thought when she married me I was real interesting, and very soon after that she wanted me to be quiet.
Yeah, you're great at dinner parties, and then
and it's time to go to sleep. Right.
Yeah. How'd you meet your wife, or where did you meet her in your process of your career?
Well, that's interesting. I met her actually with an artist, visiting artist, and I was paying the dinner out of grant money, and she was sitting on the edge of a bar right near the register, and she was wearing an all linen Belgian unbleached linen outfit, and I was taken by it and asked her if that was linen she was wearing, and she said, that's the best line I ever heard. And then a week later, I saw her again at a restaurant I was at with a friend. And I went over and said, hello, I'm the man with the linen line. And it so happens that the weekend before seeing her again, they had done a front page article in the arts section of the Columbus Dispatch about my paper mill and printery and the work I was doing. And she was all her career a graphic designer, and she loved typography and was head of publications at one time at a research institute in Columbus. and she had her favorite types, typefaces she liked. And we talked about type designers on our first date, and graphic designers, and we
game recognized game. As
yeah,
they say.
we just hit it off right away, you know.
Yeah. A lot to talk about, I would think. A lot to nerd out over in that field.
But I was pretty much love struck pretty quickly. I hope that was true for her. It might have been, you know. And she was on a trip about, I'd say less than a month after we met. She was going to Switzerland to see an old high school friend that had married a Swiss mathematician for like, gone 2 weeks. And I was hanging out at her place almost every night. I was looking for a new apartment. And I was staying at her apartment, and the mattress was just so bad. I threw it out and bought a new mattress. And I'm from New Jersey, so I simply told her that's how we court. You know, we really love someone. We buy them a new mattress.
Yeah,
There you
she
go.
felt
We throw the old one out.
She liked that gesture.
Well, it confused her at first.
Well, I guess it's preserve your self-respect too. And
Yeah, well, I persevered.
Yeah,
I persevered beyond that. Yeah.
Nice. And since your career, what do you guys do now after your careers? You're retired, and any hobbies that maintain that you?
Not really. No, I have a son. He's 36 in November. He's in the Florida Army National Guard. He was an E6 staff sergeant. Now he's a cadet finishing his degree in international studies at USF this December, and will commission as a lieutenant.
Wow.
He'll have almost 9 years active in the Army at that point. But he's currently, today as we speak, at Fort Knox out he's incognito for 13 days out in the forest doing navigation and other training.
Wow.
But he's doing extremely well. He's got a 3.9 something QM, and he's multilingual, fluent in French, speaks Spanish and Italian, and I'm not sure what he's planning to do, but in any event, he's doing very well, and I tend to help him with a lot of different matters. He's got a house here in Nokomis that I watch over when he's not there, when he's in Tampa or in the Army, and I help him with his taxes. I used to do taxes, and other administrative matters I help him with. That's going to come to an end when he graduates, I think, and gets a job. He'll have to do that all himself.
Well, it sounds like you rubbed off on him in the sense of, you may not have seen him go in the direction he did, but with the navigating, I would imagine some map-making skills might have helped him along the way.
I don't know. Mine are all purely imaginary. He's got to find his way out of the forest with nothing but the sun and the river. But he's very good. When he and I went to Paris, we visited, and we were stuck on the Farique, what is it called, the outer belt, and we were both tired from travel and upset that we couldn't find which was our exit. He said, "All right, get off anywhere, and then we'll just follow the river." This is an 11-and-a-half-year-old kid, and he was right. Wow. Got us to our pension.
Wow.
So I couldn't believe it. And then he knew the metro like the back of his hand. I said, "All right, where are we going now?" And he was 11-and-a-half-year-old. And he spoke fluent French too, because he went to a French immersion school from kindergarten to the 8th grade.
Wow.
So it was tout de jour en français every day, all just in French. So he was speaking French to all these French people. I think they thought the Americans were going to destroy French culture by teaching all their kids to speak French. Anyway, let me show you another book.
Yeah, please do.
The same people that collaborated, the calligrapher and the artist, Anthony Rice and Analia Woods and others that collaborated on the making of the Columbus letter, also worked on another project that I had wanted to do for some time. I was at the home of a friend who bought one of the Columbus letter books, and we were talking about what I might do next. And I said I'd always had the idea that I'd like to do a book the structure of which was based on Edmund Spenser's The Shepherd's Calendar, which is contemporary of Shakespeare, and is the first book ever published with glosses or footnotes. And it's a long poem which tells the story or life of Colin Clout, a shepherd. And his life begins in January and ends in December. And it follows his life month by month through all the seasons. At the beginning, he falls in love with a shepherd girl, and by the end of the poem, he's never talked to her, and she's run off with someone else. But the whole book's full of allegories to the court and to history and Greek mythology and all kinds of things that are interesting. And I had this idea that because Paul Gauguin, when he was in the Cook Islands, he painted menus for meals. There was a book published called On ces menus de Paul Gauguin. My French is terrible. But these are the 11 menus that we know of. And so I said, what I'd like to do is the life of a chef in 12 menus. Again, using that structure of the shepherd's calendar, and instead of a shepherd, a chef. And she said to me, this woman and their husband that had bought the Columbus letter, why don't you do a book with Chef Hubert Seifert, who owns a restaurant here in town called Spagio. And it turns out he had been executive chef to the King of Spain. He had apprenticed originally in in Austria after World War II, when he was 16 as a chef. And he'd had a very interesting life, cooking for various people. The end of his career in Europe was, as I say, on board yacht, cooking for the King of Spain, the future King of Spain, Juan Carlos, off the coast of Mallorca. And then he came to this country, and they opened a restaurant in Columbus, Ohio, and actually in Grandview, which is a suburb of Columbus. And so I asked her if she'd be willing to write the manuscript. And she said she would. She said, what I need is a tape recorder, so I can go into the restaurant, into his kitchen, and record him. Now, this guy didn't write English or read English. He spoke English, but he wrote and read German. So I bought her a voice-activated tape recorder, and she spent a year in his kitchen, and he produced all these meals that were historical, chronologically, arranged with circumstances in his life. The first one was when he was an apprentice graduating as a chef. The first meal he cooked was a cassoulet. We get the word casserole, which is a big pot that you bake that's got everything in it, from beans and rice and venison and pork and you name it. It goes in it and it's cooked for a long time.
Kind of a staple in
well, especially after the war.
Yeah.
And he cooked that for his family. And then also, the last meal was a lobster and some other things that he cooked aboard yacht with the King of Spain, with all the other meals in between, including his first 4th of July in the United States, when he, for the first time in his life, ate corn on the cob, which for him was food you gave to cows and pigs.
Fatten them up, yeah.
You never know people did this.
Yeah.
So he's an interesting guy. And Anthony Rice here at Ringling College, again, came up and collaborated. I should say the binding, the box, we inlaid a printing plate in each copy. So there were 12 menus plus a little title page vignette that's inlaid into the cover. I'll show you. That made 13 plates, and we got two. We made we.
Now, plate is a pun too.
This is maybe, because we printed 2 at a time. And when the project was over, we cut them in half, so we had 2 printing plates for each month. Okay? 2 menus. We etched into the printing plate, and Wood's calligraphy that hand wrote each menu. I'll show you. But so there were only 26 copies in this edition. The book sold for $2,000 a copy, and we had 18 of the copies for sale. And so, if you bought a copy, you got one of the plates, printing plates.
Wow.
So that it was limited, very highly limited.
Yeah.
And the book itself is a very big. It's a thick book, but there's no glue. There is some paste. I mean, obviously, we pasted this little title that's on one paper, pasted onto here, but there's no glue holding this together. It's all stitching and hinging. Here are vellum tapes. So it's held together by stitching these vellum tapes that weave into the structure. So this is what we call a non-glue structure. The paper is made of raw flax dyed with walnut shell husks and indigo. So it's a deep kind of blue-black.
Beautiful.
Brownish black.
I like the texture on
And
it,
you can see how that binding works. The paper's not handmade, it's what we call a mold-made paper. Here's a title page. The illustration on the title page, every copy is hand-drawn. This is not printed this color. This is all pencil. Anthony Rice went in and drew every one.
Wow.
This is, of course, our printing, black.
Does he do the drawing before or after the type on the page?
After.
Wow.
Yeah.
You got to get it right.
Yeah. Well, I don't mind if he ruins a copy, but I do mind if he's drawn on it and then when I print it, I make a mistake. Then I've ruined his hand drawing.
Right.
So I'd rather
that way
he make a mistake than me. You know?
Yeah, it's terrible. You oops, I forgot a comma or something like that.
I want to get to one of the menus. Oh, and my wife designed actually the contents page.
Aww.
Now, what people don't realize about this kind of printing, this is printed letterpress. So the surface of the plates are raised. The ink goes on top of raised surfaces. You cannot print this in one pass through the press. This is three, well, for every color, it's another pass. So since the numbers 12 are in 12 different colors, this sheet of paper went through the press, guess what, 13 times.
Wow. Incredible.
In order to put those colors on. Now people today push a button and it comes out, right? But not for this kind of printing. And Ann Elia Woods did the calligraphy, the design. This is printed, not drawn.
Does the ink itself have a certain character to it, or are there a lot of different?
It's a stiffer ink. For letterpress printing, it's what we call a short ink. That is to say, if you put a spatula down on it, on a glass plate where you roll out your ink, if you put a spatula on it and you then lifted it up, the threads that would come up are short. For most printing presses, like high-speed presses, they use longer inks that will flow more. These inks don't flow any more than you have to.
What's the longevity on an ink like that? I mean, this is kind of the old way of doing it, so it's probably...
Well, this is archival ink.
Right.
So this ink, unless you put it under strong ultraviolet light for a long, long time, won't lose its color, but this too. Now there's one of the menus. And you can feel this is raised because this is like engraving. This is printed off a copper plate.
Like on the front.
So each is the story behind the menu. Can you see that at all? Is this better if I hold it up like this? The story behind the menu. And then it gives the meals, the menu, and the presentation. Let's see the presentation. There's information about the menus here on the ingredients, and then the story and the presentation of the food.
beautiful.
And then you have another meal here. Now these menus, each one are tipped in. You can see there's little slant. What do you call it?
Oh yeah.
The paper's cut, and the binding here. This is a sheet that's folded, so you can see right through there. Right? It's folded. So you get to certain portions in the book where in the binding you'll see there's a little flap right here that's sticking out because that fold. In order to sew it in there, you have to put a little flange to sew it in.
Yeah.
A very complicated sewing process.
Yeah.
But it allows you to take the menu out of the book and put it back in. Although I wouldn't advise taking this into the kitchen. Yeah. But this was done with Anthony Rice and Annalia Woods, the same people that helped with the Columbus letter. So now those books I call livre d'artiste. They are beautifully illustrated books, but both of those are containers with art in them. And albeit they're very beautiful containers, well-crafted containers, they are nonetheless more traditional books in the sense that a book contains art and literature, right? But this book is something we call an artist's book because it is not just a container. This book by, I'm trying to remember the name of the artist now. Let's see if I can remember. What is her name? What is her name? Yeah, Rebecca Harvey was chairman of the art department at Ohio State and a ceramics professor. And she made these glass bottles. She blew these. This is hand-blown glass.
Wow.
Bottles that she made. This is a bung, and on it shows you the number of the copy. This is copy number 18.
Wow.
And she conceived of this artist's book, and you can see this isn't just a container. Everything about it is like all part and parcel of the whole artwork. There's no such thing really as a separate. It's not an artwork and a text that's put in a binding.
Right.
Because the binding is part of the artwork, isn't it? And it's a very sculptural book, isn't it? This is a handmade 10-foot by 10-inch piece of paper, a scroll, which she made. And the title of this is a poem she wrote called Any Number of Things. And it's about the day James Cook died on the beach in Hawaii, the Cook Islands. And it's printed. It's a long printed text with drawings on it. And this is all printed and then sewn with pieces of paper and some gold leaf, you know?
And even though it's a traditional message in the bottle, and you think of images like that you would see in a movie, this has got a modern look to it.
Yes. And it's about the day Captain Cook died, which was totally by accident. His crew were taking nails out of the ship and trading the nails with natives for sex and other things, food and whatever, you know?
Essentials.
These iron nails. If they had kept it up, the boat was going to sink.
Yeah.
And so they stopped doing it, and the natives got upset and stole a skiff, a boat that takes, you know, them back and forth from land to the boat, the big ship sitting out in the harbor, in the cove. And so they were fighting over this stolen skiff, and Captain Cook came on board, onto the beach and tried to settle the things. The natives loved him, but somebody by accident hit him on the head and he died. It was totally And so the title of the poem is Any Number of Things. He was killed for any number of reasons.
Mm-hmm.
No, one can't tell exactly what caused it. It was an accident. And it's really too bad because he was young. But this, I should add that the plate that it sits on, oh, I dropped that. The plate that it sits on, it has a portrait of Cook that Rebecca Harvey, she made the plate and made a stencil with ceramic. What do you call it again? You know when you paint on ceramic, glaze.
Oh,
Ceramic glaze, and
kind of like pointillism in a way.
well, this is calligraphy.
Calligraphy.
You can read this story about Captain Cook's demise, and it makes up his portrait. It's all done with calligraphy.
And the calligraphy in itself is just gorgeous.
You can read it.
Yeah, you could read it, and it creates
The portrait.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With like thicker, more heavy-handed
Yeah.
ink parts.
Right, and that's by Analia Woods. And then the bottom we have a handmade piece of paper glued to the bottom of the plate, which is the colophon that tells how the book was made. You know, and this is an artist's book.
That's incredible. I mean,
Yeah.
and that I mean,
You see how different this is from the others.
yes, and it still has historical information
Yeah.
throughout it. It's still done in traditional ways, but it can sit on a table as more of a sculpture than some of the other examples, and it's done. The art being more modern is done in a kind of different way that's kind of more modern art. The whole thing is like a modern art piece.
Well, I like to tell the story of the invention of paper according to Sesame Street.
Mm.
You know, because we're going through a change. You know that. We've been through this before when oral culture was transformed by writing culture.
Mm-hmm.
And then writing was extended by print culture beginning in the 15th century,
Mm-hmm.
right? And now we're changing quite a bit into something called digital culture.
Digital, and it's not going to last through the ages.
I don't know, but the change is really significant.
Well, I could see it as the Library of Alexandria, where it just burned up. That could happen, I think, with, like they say, what's the movie? Is the new Blade Runner 2049?
Yeah, I saw it. Yeah.
In the beginning of it, they say there's a solar flare, the big blackout that destroyed all the digital media. The things that they missed the most were the photos of their family and things like that. So it's. Now there are hard copies, like you could use like the stuff we use, the gold archival media. It's not connected to a power grid. It's not on a digital circuit board and things like that. So there are some.
Yeah, there's a chance we'll lose a lot.
There's with the solar flare they always say that's the way that'll fry any sort of electronic equipment on the
Even
planet.
every storage device.
What's that?
Every storage device?
If it's connected to the power grid.
Well, your discs that are sitting in a drawer aren't destroyed by that.
Correct, because it's not connected to the
Yeah.
power grid.
But you know, we are short-sighted. Don't forget. Look, I like a joke about these guys are in prison.
Mm-hmm.
I used to tell this to my students to explain the difference between oral and written culture. And so this new guy arrives at lunchtime. He's having lunch, and someone stands up and goes, 16, and everybody laughs.
Mm.
Have you heard this joke?
Mm-mm.
Another guy stands up and says 23, and everybody laughs. And he says, what's going on? He says, well, we've been in this prison so long that we've heard these jokes so many times that we've written them all down. They're in the prison library, and we've numbered them.
Mm.
So he goes to the library, and he looks up a few good jokes, comes back the next day at lunch. He stands up, and he says, 53. Nobody laughs. Oh, stands up, he goes, 22. Nobody laughs. He says, what's wrong? These are some of the best jokes I've ever heard. He said, Well, some people can tell it and some people can't.
Yeah.
So the difference, a great deal of difference between writing and oral culture, and in print culture too, the difference is that there was a lot in the performance.
Mm-hmm.
You got to remember that Homer was blind and never wrote anything. So the Iliad and the Odyssey, these were poems completely memorized.
Mm-hmm.
All right? It was the meter and the rhyme and the consonant sounds that kept it intact. The same is true with Muhammad. Never wrote a thing. He was illiterate. Do we have anything that Jesus wrote? Nothing. The closest thing to him that we have verbatim, as much as we can imagine as verbatim, was the Sermon on the Mount that was written down by somebody or memorized and later written down by somebody in Jerusalem. Other than that, no. Well, the Sermon on the Mount, I may not have been in Jerusalem, but so we forget that, you know, many cultures that didn't use writing, Native American cultures that didn't use it, would communicate, but it was all face-to-face, memorized through poems, through singing, and all the Odyssey was sung, by the way.
And a lot of it is, you're saying, the nuance of the delivery.
And the delivery, the performance values.
How do you feel about memes, modern, like some people compare it to, you know, like hieroglyphics, where it's not spelt out in a language, but it's understood by.
Yes, there's much
people.
more that's visual. Just look at the old the glyphs, the hieroglyphs, and the other glyphs that are done in Australia and other places. So you see, at one time I worked with some moderately mentally retarded adults. Had a grant from the Committee for the Arts for the Handicapped. From Washington, D.C., and we had worked with some art education people at my lab using a system called Bliss Symbolics, which was kind of based, Charles Bliss invented this from after being in a concentration camp in Germany. He thought he could create a visual graphic language system, a graphic system that, like Esperanto, would be a universal communication system. He based it in part on some rather felonious notions about Chinese pictographs. You know, so an arrow pointing up meant good, an arrow pointing down meant bad, and other symbols that were used. And I did have one of my apprentices who was, I don't think he was retarded. He had more adaptive issues. He couldn't sit still and he would disappear often. But he memorized, he knew Bliss like you and I know like English, writing. He could write it and translate it just perfectly, you know? And it never survived as a popular form of graphic communication, but it has been popularly used by the handicapped community among those who neither sign nor speak. People with cerebral palsy, and there's a Bliss dictionary, and people have added symbols, new words, and so forth. You know, but there have been many different communication systems.
Right.
You know, I think the two cuneiform systems. I think recently, I think it was ChatGPT that just figured out one that they had never translated before.
Oh, I think
Linear
I saw
B,
an article.
Linear B.
I didn't read the
Linear
article.
B, I think, is just recently translated by ChatGPT. If it's correct, I don't know.
If it's correct, it's just cleverly spun into some.
But I mean,
dialogue.
The way you speak, the sounds, and so forth can mean so much. And when you read a novel or a poem, so much is between the lines. And you know, it's just.
Kind of reminds me of talking to my mother. You read between the lines.
Really? Yeah.
Yeah.
You have to. Yeah, you have to have been there. You have to, you know. But we increasingly want to be able to communicate without knowing the people at all, and we don't want to know anything and be able to understand them without knowing anything about them at all. It's like wanting to get your mail without knowing the mailman, right? Don't you think?
Yeah.
It's one friend refers to this as man's innate urge to become inorganic. You know, when did man first want to de-anthropomorphize himself? You know, but we keep McLuhan. You remember McLuhan? Yeah, famous communications philosopher from Canada. He had a book called The Gutenberg Galaxy, and there were some others. I read them, but you know, he had the idea that you know, just as a gun is an extension of your fist, you know, computers are an extension of your autonomic nervous system. And now we're beginning to create through, what's it called, artificial intelligence.
Are you going to get the brain chip too?
Yeah, we're going to try to, you know, externalize and create an extension of ourselves in the form of a brain.
How do you feel about that? And when you think about like the Elon Musk, the Neuralink and things where you'll have access to these digital storages, and it's in one of Elon Musk's biggest drivers for creating this technology is because he says the interface between the technology is too slow. Writing and reading and everything, that's kind of goes in the face of a book. And
well, since the book is my primary focus and the history and art of the book is my focus, what I like to tell is the story, as I said, of the invention of paper according to Sesame Street. So Ernie, you know, is king, and you got Grover is the royal mailman, and he every day brings the royal mail to Ernie, and these are the mail's in the form of these rocks that somebody's carved into messages for the king. And inevitably Ernie, having to march up the hill to the king every day, tired, will inevitably, he drops a letter on the royal foot. And the king says, I've had it with these letters, they're too heavy. I need something else to replace them that we can use for the royal mail. So he calls the royal smart guy named Sherlock, and he sends him into a cave, and you see clank, bang. You know, and he comes out waving this light white, thin material, and says, Eureka, I found it. We're going to call it paper. And you can write on it, you can wrap a tuna fish sandwich in it, you can make a hat out of it, or a kite. When all of a sudden the wind comes along and blows the piece of paper out of his hand. So what do you think they did with the rocks?
Paperweight?
Right, paperweights. So those rocks, which had a function, not just a form, they weren't just aesthetically pleasing, those marks that they carved in them to make them interesting to read, but they also, they had a utility, a social utility, but now that's lost. So now they use them as these sculptures that weigh enough to put on top. They always weighed a lot. That was always a quality.
So are you saying...
And now the paper is replacing them. Well, my theory is that all technology becomes an art. When it loses its social functionality, so books no longer are the best container for storage and transmission of information. Right? They've lost that.
However, when stone, things carved into stone do last a lot longer, and paper has had a pretty good track record too, right? What would be the oldest?
Well, you can destroy the stones.
Right.
You know, the thing about printing is it made censorship nearly impossible, because you could produce enough copies and spread them out, so to find every copy was difficult.
Right.
So in the days when every book had to be handwritten, right, censorship was much easier. You could destroy the books, and in the oral culture, you know, censorship was much easier. Just kill the speaker.
Right.
And that ended it, right? So today, censorship is very difficult. I mean, one of the big problems, I mean, look at all the First Amendment issues we have with social media. Now, I'm of the opinion that social media, like Facebook, are publishers.
They are.
I think they are. They're not just interlocutors of existing published material. They are in fact publishers, and I think we're going to have to change the rules a bit.
Because
They are free from liability that publishers would not be free from.
Why would they be called publishers? Because they have the ability and do curate the information, or what would it?
I think because they disseminate.
And
I have made one-of-a-kind books. I've made all our books. We did, I think, 110 copies of this bottle book.
Wow.
As far as I'm concerned, it's a prototype. That's not enough copies. You see, and of 26 copies of our cookbook. I would have liked to have a trade publisher come along and made more copies and disseminated it. So I can't disseminate. I'm still a publisher because I produce more than one copy, but I think that that they are publishers, and I think the fact that they've been getting away without being publishers, you know, and they have these quasi-editorial roles too. You know, they do limit some speech. So I don't see why to treat them as publishers. I think it's a mistake. There's a rule. What is it? Rule 126 or something like that that frees them from liability.
Right.
I think that's a big mistake. That's my opinion. But I'm not a legal scholar, and certainly not a First Amendment scholar. But I can say that I think that they are publishers. You know, and the idea that somebody sets up their own social media outlet, like our previous president has done with Truth Social, or some of these other things. Well, I used to be a member of an organization where people had presses in their basements. You know, in this country, there's no way to stop somebody from putting a press in their basement and printing anything they want.
And like I just pop in my mind, back in early American history, secret societies, and they might have printing devices in their basement, and then
you got to be kidding! In Boston, the old Orchard House, the Oyster House, right in Boston, upstairs above there was a room where they had a clandestine press prior to the Revolutionary War that was putting out a lot of anti-monarchy pamphlets, and had the redcoats and had the British known about it, they would have gone up there and torn it apart.
Well, you must have loved a bit of fly in the wall and that going on, huh?
Oh, sure. Ben Franklin, you know, I published a book by Ben Franklin, something called Apology for Printers that he wrote. He had these two guys come into his office and said that if he continued to print an ad in his paper that said that what was it? There was a ship that was leaving for England, but it said and how much it cost and when you had to board, but sea hens and black gowns not wanted. And these guys were black gowns. They were Episcopal. What do you call it? Church of England. And so they said, if you keep publishing this ad, we're going to try to shut you down, put you out of business. So he wrote this piece called An Apology to Printers. It's a precursor to our First Amendment, in which he said, look, someone wants to pay me to put something in the paper, I'm going to print it. I'm just a printer. I'm not an arbiter of the marketplace of ideas. And you know, if you pay me to print something, then I'll print it. And this is an interesting thing. You know, he just saw himself as a printer, not a publisher. So
we actually have a lot of history and stories like that could guide in the current situations that we have going on, it seems like. Oh yeah,
but in the United States, people they don't study history. I mean, I had students, a lot of undergraduate students, you know, in my shop, and I would have to start my discussion about the history of books and printing. Then, you know, when Gutenberg first established his press in Mainz, Germany, and printed the first, you know, Bible. And a few other things, they have no concept. You know, I have to say, you know, Columbus sailed the ocean blue in 1492 to give them a historical context. We're not teaching history very well, and people complain, say, well, you're woke. Most of what people talk about when they say they're woke or not woke is whether they've studied history or not. You know. And we don't a lot of I don't think that the United States does a good job either teaching languages or history. We don't realize, we're vulnerable because of this. Other cultures study our history and our language much more than we study other cultures' histories and languages.
If one was to independently study, where would one go in this day and age to study history in the way that it should?
In a word, the library.
Mm-hmm. And books.
The library.
And paper books.
Libraries are really
right.
just the greatest places on earth.
Mm.
And here they are trying to ban books.
Right.
It's crazy.
Yeah.
Those are the books you want to read, all the ones they're trying to ban.
What is your opinion, what's your top 3 books for a book guy?
There's a couple books I've read in my day that really influenced me a lot. I mean, it's so long ago, some of them, but also short stories that I read by different authors that I liked. But one book that immediately comes to mind is the autobiography of R.G. Collingwood. The first chapter is called Bent of a Twig. Mm. And it tells how he was about 9 years old, and his father gave him a copy of Descartes' Descartes' Principia to read, and he couldn't understand a word of it. Mm. And for the rest of his life, he spent studying so he could read that book and understand it. Mm. Was it Newton? I'm trying to remember. Was Newton? Did Newton write the Principia? Anyway, so what other books? I always liked Hannah Arendt, The Human Condition. That was a very important book that I read. I read a book once a long time ago. Mircea Eliade wrote a book called The Myth of Eternal Return. That's a book I'll remember forever. There's a number.
I have not heard of
any of those.
Any of those.
I had a good education.
Yeah. What about those books and those examples? What appeals to you in a book? Is just the content?
Well, I do like some fiction. I read Henry James short stories I liked a lot, and I liked Hawthorne short stories, any number of them. When I taught art appreciation, I put together readings for my students about art and artists by other authors like Hawthorne and James and so forth. And also some articles, like there was one by McLuhan called The King's New Clothes. And Rudolf Arnheim on art and psychology. And these were readings. The students in art appreciation also had to do watercolors. They kept the sketchbook and some other things, assignments they had. I designed the class. Mm-hmm. When I was at Denison University, I had a summer fellowship with one of the professors to design an introduction to art as one of the choices that students would have in their requirements to take either art, music, or theater classes among their general education requirements. Mm-hmm. That was a long time ago.
How do you feel about some of the greats, so to speak, of like Les Mis or like Dostoevsky?
Well, yeah, I mean, I read Crime and Punishment, and I remember reading some of Notes from the Underground by Dostoevsky, Brothers Karamazov. I read Kafka. I did read a lot. I guess for an artist, I was read more than some, I guess. I was more verbal. Mm. And maybe that's why I ended up in publishing. Mm. My graduate work is in printmaking, so I did lithography and etching. Mm. Not much woodcut, but my closest friend and colleague and teacher was a woodcutter.
Did you know you were going to get into a more art-centered facet of that when you started?
I got interested in art in the 7th grade. Mm. And I lived outside New York City. And I spent many, many weekends going into the museums and art galleries. And I was able to also meet individually some what are now famous artists, contemporary, modern artists from the 20th century. Roy Lichtenstein, who went to Ohio State, where I taught. And I had an introduction through my professor in graduate school and was able to visit him through my, it was not my graduate school, it was undergraduate. I had an introduction. I was able to visit him. And then I met Barnett Newman, sometimes called the father of the hard edge school, only he said he never had the pleasure of sleeping with the mother. What else? Barney Newman was also he was famous for saying, aesthetics is to artists what ornithology is to the birds. I remember that one. That's famous. I've met some other artists. There was Jacob Lawrence, came to Denison when I was there as an undergraduate and critiqued my work. He was a major American black artist, and I just love his work.
That name sounds familiar.
Jacob Lawrence, and he did some just fabulous paintings. He drew very well, he could draw well, and interesting guy.
Are there any other examples of book artists? Because when you were telling me about what it is you do, I don't think I've ever considered that in the way that what you do. Are there other people that are doing this kind of work?
There are, and some of them do work that's way better than I ever could do. I'm trying to remember this one fellow that's got a press now in New York, does such exquisite work. And some of the people in the field could do beautiful handwriting or calligraphy, which I never did.
But historically, has there been a lot of book artists, books as art, as opposed to just book as a container?
The whole idea or concept or a critical appreciation in the art world of the book as an artwork, when we talk about artist books, really begin in the mid or late 50s or early 60s, something like that. Some people say the first artist book was a book about, I think it was called 26 Gas Stations, and it's just photographs, but there's no text. But there was in Europe a tradition of fine printing, beginning with the craft revival of the arts and crafts movement under William Morris, where they set up presses and they designed type and printed books with the idea of getting back to the quality of work of the late Middle Ages. And it was an anti-modern movement, you know. It's not anti-technology, but raising technology at its best to the level of art. So that good typography, good quality designed letter forms, beautifully handmade paper and binding, all combined to produce beautiful books. You know, and that began with William Morris. In this country, what was his name? The Roycrofters were among those in New York State that ran a shop and sold commercial furniture, all supposed to be fine, handcrafted, and not like modern mechanically produced carpentry. Furniture that was just machine made. This was in opposition to the machine made object. It was a backlash, so a throwback. But they weren't Luddites, you know, they weren't anti-technology, anti-industrialization. They just wanted to be sure that there was a distinction. Yeah, maybe some scholars might argue that they were anti, you know, machinery and all that, but I don't think that was the case. I think they just wanted to show that the old crafts had great value in craftsmanship.
Is your department at OSU still operational?
Nope, it's mothballed.
Wow.
And that just says, you know, that it takes a personality sometimes to run these things. And you know, Ohio State, when I was there, had an annual budget of about $1.4 billion for the entire student body. Was around 52,000 with around 40 46 or 48,000 on the main campus. There was a little over 18,000 faculty and staff. That budget, 1.4 billion, was divided approximately 50-50 between the medical school and the rest, the main colleges and departments. But my program had an annual gross budget of about 150,000. And that's just a back alley operation. I mean, that's peanuts.
Right. I was going to say, because you got so many
that's
contributors.
So small.
So much time.
And we had, my salary and benefits were just under a third on average. Mm-hmm. The rest of it came from donor pool, earnings from sales, and from grants. Mm. I was the second largest grant getter in the College of the Arts, second only to Chuck Surrey, who ran the computer graphics lab. And he did work for the Navy. I don't think the Navy gave out any book arts grants. Mm. I know they gave out computer graphics grants because they were trying to create simulations for their flyers. Mm. And you could move the decimal point, many times for his grants compared to mine.
What I think, this kind of art is hard to reproduce, and it can't even be copied in the same way a painting can be, because it's got many pages and it's...
Well, there are trade editions that are produced of limited edition fine arts publications. There was a press in Iowa, University of Iowa has... I should go back and say that while I'm an old timer now, and when I started, I was the only book arts lab in an art education department. That's where I started. Now there are a number of book arts. There was no such thing as a Master of Fine Arts degree in book arts. You get one in painting and sculpture and ceramics and so forth. Now, Ohio State went through a number of changes, and so they didn't want to keep the book arts too much. They didn't keep jewelry. They didn't keep weaving. They didn't keep a number of craft areas. They kind of eschewed themselves of any craft. Mm-hmm. I mean, the crafts are kind of looked down upon at some places. Mm. So that was one of my problems. Mm-hmm. And I ran a kind of little black sheep independent operation. I was very multidisciplinary, and I was dealing with many departments: English, art, including the history department and so forth. Mm-hmm. I got students from across campus of many disciplines, even theater students. We did publish some plays as well. So I worked.
So it's like a...
And with the community, I was very involved in the local school system, doing workshops for teachers, gifted and talented program for a group of special education students and so forth. But you go around the country now, University of Alabama offers a Master of Fine Arts in book arts. University of Iowa now offers one. For many years, Iowa had programs in the library in binding. They had programs to teach binding. They had paper. There was someone who taught printing in the English department had a press, printing and typography. The journalism department had metal typing presses, and were teaching printing too in journalism. They had no coordination. Eventually, they coordinated it all together. Hired a guy in paper, a fabulous guy, Tim Barrett, who won a MacArthur, and set up a paper-making lab which did research on the way papers were made in the late Middle Ages, and it's fabulous, and made archival paper for the Library of Congress and other institutions that they needed to repair some old books. He made papers just the way they were made originally so that you could use these papers to repair old books. And they taught papermaking as part of their, and now offer a Arts of the Book degree, in a Master of Arts degree, and also many schools. There are a number of other schools where this is offered now.
Well, that's not. I mean, people still appreciate even a nice magazine. Like, it's just nice when you have a nice binded
something to hold.
Something, and with pleasant pictures. People who have taken nice photographs and written nice stories and articles, and something you could put on your coffee table and just thumb through. I mean, I've always appreciated,
Sure.
things like that. And I don't appreciate it when you get the cheap one with the staple in the thing and that you go, it's just not the same as a nice feeling.
Yeah, and some people even like the smell of an old book.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Well, for me, and I have to say this, I was always driven mostly into my activities as a teacher, as an educator. And I worked with many different ages. I've worked from mostly third grade and up, but I've worked in many classrooms. After graduate school, my first job was teaching printing for 5th through 9th graders. And what I have come to understand, and one of the problems in many of our school systems, and I think it may be partly true in Sarasota now, with the way the boards are being manipulated, the boards of education, is they're not understanding. Education is not knowledge transfer. It's not you're open some little kid's head and pour information in and then test to see how much is retained at a given moment. Education is knowledge construction. And it tends to be more collaborative than people appreciate. You are building something, making something. Learning is an act, not a fact.
Like in terms of critical thinking and things like that?
Yeah, the literacies, the mastery of reading, writing, and so forth is part of it, but also appreciation of other people's ideas, discourse, right?
The emotional reward.
There are many literacies other than just becoming a man of letters. That is the old concept, the man of letters. I consider myself somewhat a man of letters, but not really. I've known scholars. I had friends who were scholars, and as a publisher, I worked with them. When we did the Columbus letter, we had the poem, as it was written by a poet, was looked at first by a scholar who was a Spanish scholar, who looked at it and read the original Spanish that Columbus wrote and compared it and made a few suggestions to make it so that it was historically accurate. And Ohio State University Library has so many amazing collections, right? For other things we published. There's a poet, Hart Crane, an Ohio poet, died very young. We have many of his letters, and we have a modern American manuscript collection at Ohio State. One of the outside of, I think it's maybe the second best New Testament collection in the world of New Testament studies at Ohio State. And we have some pages from the first English translation of the Bible. We have other things at Ohio State. Henry VIII's Bible.
Are they pretty good about digitizing these things now?
Yeah, they are doing a lot of digital work. I was at Ohio State. My last 10 years was in the Office of Preservation and Digital Preservation too, and they were very active in all of that. I like to say they were doing the preserving. I was being preserved, but because I'm kind of a dinosaur. But when it comes back to education,
be in a book someday?
What's that? Maybe
Are you going to be in a book?
I might be in a book. Yeah, yeah, the book of life.
Yeah.
God's book. But the point is, like Ben Franklin, huh? But when you think of education as knowledge construction and not knowledge transfer, you go about it very differently. There's not the same authority. Authority is based on the quality of the material that you're researching or understanding and the quality of your discourse in the marketplace of ideas, your appeals to what's true and not true based on facts that you research and that you understand.
And how it's interpreted.
And you understand the differences in how things are interpreted, right? And you look at historical meanings. And I did a lot of work with a lot of students that did collaborative projects. Design students working with art students, working with English and history students on projects. And you know,
it's kind of a vetting process when you're doing it as a collaboration, because everybody's kind of giving their 2 cents and interpreting it.
That's right, and they're you know, they develop more autonomous authenticity to their knowledge that way than by thinking you're filling their head and then testing to see if it was filled or not.
Mm-hmm.
There's no ownership.
Right.
If you can't get students, and I tended to go more student-oriented teaching, or I call it not the subject matter orientation, but the student orientation, focusing on the student's mind, the student's interest, the student's energy and capacities, not just the subject matter.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I mean, but there's now so much emphasis on subject matter transfer.
Right.
And that's,
as if we're a digital like we're a computer, just to make carbon copies of something.
That's right. And that seems to be, even to do it that way, so antithetical to the fact that there's so many storage and transmission methods today outside the mind that you don't need a mind to do all that.
Right.
Right?
Right.
I mean, one of the things that printing did was free our memories.
Mm-hmm.
Right? You don't have to memorize Homer,
mm-hmm.
the poem, to tell to somebody else, because we can read it.
And the reason why you would even record anything anyways is because it had some sort of emotional impact at the time, and you're trying to pass that experience on. And if you just remember things verbatim and you're not conveying that emotional impact, then what's the point of, you lost the point of why you preserved it in the first place.
Yeah. There was one group of graduate students I worked with in Upper Arlington, Ohio elementary school, Barrington Elementary School, with third through I think 6th grade or 5th grade. Maybe it was 2nd through 5th, I forget. And we set up a publications lab. We installed a press and some other equipment, and we worked with the students and the teachers in this publications lab. And the idea was to do publishing or publication-based literacy learning, that by having the students do their own newspaper, their own books of stories or whatever, was a way to get them to learn the various masteries of reading and writing and editing, you know, mm-hmm. and and if there was a student that was good at art, they would do illustration, or if there was someone else who liked to do the sewing and the binding, they could involve in that way more than other things. They all would contribute, and they produced these books, and they would make 50 or 100 copies, and they would sell them to the other students, or to you know, and distribute them that way, mm-hmm. you know, for $1 or $2. Mm-hmm. And they loved it. It mm-hmm. was very successful. It was a couple of years we had that lab in there.
Yeah, it's probably, those kids probably have a fond memory of that too, especially in this day and age.
And they're not made to just sit down, study something, and then take a test.
Right.
To see if they retained it.
Right.
That's not how they did things.
No,
I mean, you'd come up to them and they'd be busy saying, well, we're researching the history of our school. Mm. We went into the library and we got all kinds of information. We interviewed people.
Because they're
and
creating.
It would blow my mind, the stuff that they would come up with.
They get excited.
No one had to tell them.
Because they're creating. It's a project, and they're at the end of it, they're crafting something.
They are, yeah. That was my approach to education.
That's interesting. That's very, very cool. And yeah, it's nowadays, yeah, you just Google it or whatever you do, and you go, there's the answer. But you really didn't learn anything.
Well, if you're Googling it because you're trying to create something and there's a problem, someone's not sure if it's right or not, and you say, would you go Google that and check it, because we're editing this and someone wrote this word and we're not sure what it means. Mm-hmm. That's a process that everybody gets engaged in. It's an editorial process. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. And
That's a tool in a bigger
Yeah, and that
project.
it's more integrative. You know, and it doesn't leave anybody out. It doesn't leave one branch of knowledge out. You never know what's gonna happen. So, anyway,
How do you how do you feel about audiobooks? Because they're very prevalent in this day and
I've used them. I've listened to them.
I use them a lot.
They're
I
great
like
on
it.
long trips.
Right. Yeah. I wrote a report when I was in community college to pick a topic and write an essay about it. It was books on tape, and I wrote it just because it was a silly thing to write about, but it was. Yeah, it was like I remember putting back then. It was like the little cassettes and you.
What did you study in school?
Well, was not interested in the community college. Did not finish that. I would later go to a technical school for recording arts for audio engineering and sound production, and so I got a bachelor's in that. And then.
Oh, you did what? Yeah, you can get a bachelor's in that.
Yeah. I guess it's not like at a major university, but.
And do you play an instrument?
I played saxophone in high school.
No kidding. Who's your favorite saxophone player?
Bleeding Gums Murphy? No, that's from The Simpsons. That's one of those things like I was actually inspired to play saxophone because of The Simpsons.
Really?
So I got fairly good in a high school
You know
level.
the name Jerry Mulligan?
No.
Paul Desmond?
Coltrane, some of those.
Oh, okay.
I never got into, I appreciate it more now, but I never really got into jazz at that time.
Oh, yeah. When I was in high school, I used to read downbeat. But I broke my jaw as a kid playing baseball. And my oral surgeon was good friends with Jerry Mulligan, who was I think tenor sax. He was pretty well known as a jazz sax.
Yeah. Player. I dabble in electronic music. So in high school, at the same time I was doing the sax,
You know the name Edgar Varese?
No.
He was an early electronic musician.
Synthesizist?
Well, very early on.
I met Patrick Moraz. He was the keyboard player for the Moody Blues.
Yeah, okay.
He came in and he actually invited me to go see his studio, but I didn't know them. I had heard of Moody Blue. I didn't know him as a keyboard player, but I looked him up, and he's got all the synths, and he's like a mad scientist with it. But
I went to an Edgar Varese concert in Town Hall in New York City when I was in high school with a friend of mine, and people were throwing cabbages on the stage and tomatoes.
Why that? Is that
Because they didn't like it.
Didn't like it.
But there was a guy in front of me and my friend. He had this very long, slick black hair. So really some pomade on it or something that, made it shine and stay down nicely. And I noticed at one point too that his feet, he had he had this black suit and black pants with these black pointy shoes. Very tightly fit too. He was very, he was dapper but sleek. And I remember at one point during the concert, he turned to his friend and says, or just when the music ended too, he said, "I almost reached the moment of levitation." Meanwhile, there are people throwing tomatoes on the stage.
It probably helped add to the theatrics.
I had a ball. I mean, I thought it was one of the fun things I did as a young kid.
What do you think about the direction of the arts in general now, like music and, especially
I haven't kept
digital.
up much, so there's a lot going on in the art world now. The world of this
NFTs.
NFTs.
Yeah.
To me, well, this reminds me of a joke.
Let's hear it.
Yeah, guy goes to his friends, says, "Look, I've got an investment. You give me $500 every week. I'm gonna give you a dividend. You leave your original $500 invested." He says, "That's great." And every week they get $25, $50, $100. Every week goes by. He does this for a year. He says, "This is just an amazing investment. I've made back my money many times." He says, "What am I investing in?" He says, "What difference does it make? It's a good investment." He says, "No, I got to know." He says, "All right, you're investing in sardines." I can make this, by the way, a longer story, but I'm going to shorten it. sardines? What kind of sardines? You know, what difference does it make? No, I got to see these sardines. So they go down to the warehouse, they open a crate, they open a can, they look in, and the canned sardines are putrefied. You couldn't, they're awful.
Mm-hmm.
And he turns to the guy and says, "Well, nobody can eat these sardines." He says, "These sardines," he says, "are not for eating. These are for investing." You know, so that's the way I feel about some of this. Just like a Bitcoin, I think the technology is more interesting than the economics of it. I think the economics of it smacks of a Ponzi scheme.
Right. Yeah, I think a lot of
But
people
the
agree
technology and the idea, first of all, it's all eclipsed by Marcel Duchamp, who's famous, you know, for turning a urinal into an artwork, right? And some other things he did.
There's a lot of that going on these days, isn't there? Putting a banana on a wall or whatever.
Yeah. So the idea of art as an object, or the idea of the art market, has very little to do with art, really. My definition for art is simple. It's the idea of art is self-translation. The process of expressing through sounds, shapes, mud, egg, coal, yarn, manure, whatever stuff you've got in the universe that you can use, whatever it is, to shape some feel for things, right? And watching over the relationship of that stuff to that initial feeling to see if it works or not, right? So you've got T1 where you have this feel for something, T2 where you express it, and then the synthesis of those two things in the form of a critical overarching sense of does it work or not? And if not, let me try it this way or that.
And as the creator.
As in any translation. Like you go from one language to another. Does it work or not? I'm going from, you know both languages, but your translation, does it work? And it's that third thing, which is what make art work. Again, art is like learning an act, not a fact. So this is not, what makes it art is not the artifact. It's that act of making this thing this way or that in relationship to that feel for something.
As an admirer of art, whenever I get captivated by some art in whatever form, I always get a little sense of confusion and even haunted by it in a way.
Yeah.
Because you're just kind of caught off guard and you're just kind of looking at it curiously. It just opens your imagination in such a way.
When you hear a piece of music that attracts you, the first time you can't repeat that music.
I often songs I hate to begin with. I'll go, it's almost too good, where you go, no.
But if you try to play it back or sing it back or hum it back or do it, it takes a while to get to know it.
Right.
But I see the viewer or critic of an artwork. First of all, understand I'm saying that every artist is their own first critic. Okay? Because they're the first ones to say, do I have it right or not?
Is it done? Yeah.
Or should I leave it and go on and try something else? But, so a critic, an art critic or viewer, is like a violinist playing a score. Well, let me try it. Is this how it sounds supposed to sound? Blah, blah, blah.
Traditional.
And you as a viewer, it takes some experience with it. You know, your first date doesn't tell you everything you need to know. Right?
Yeah. That's what is again, back to what you were saying earlier. It's art is almost like the information in a book. It needs to have that feeling associated with it, not just.
It's got to come to life for you.
Yeah, there's a thing sitting on the table. And I feel that way about yours. Like, the more I was thinking about it, and I was doing a little research, it's like, it's so complex and so many layers and so much collaboration and so much. It's art in art and art wrapped in art, and it's really fantastic. And
Well, thank you.
And it seems like it was a small little sliver of time that it kind of blossomed, and now it's, like you said, in mothballs.
Yeah.
But your work as a book, these books will last a long time if they're cared
Well, they're
for.
in many collections all over the world.
I think that's incredible.
You know, so
And that's something an NFT, it won't have that longevity as your art here, and I think it's incredible. And you seem to be just in a class all of your own, because you said, yeah, there's a couple other people that are doing it, but now in this day and age where things are turning into, digital everything.
Well, I'm not opposed to digital. I mean, I think I had a grant from the National Library Association, American Library Association, and I produced a digital catalog raisonné of almost all of Logan Elm Press books and broadsides. We did a number of other ephemeral printed pieces, posters and the like, that I don't have everything, because when we started out, I mean, we had to get permission, and people either died or moved away, and artists, and if I couldn't get the permission slips signed, I couldn't put it onto the, couldn't digitize it and do it. So,
Yeah.
but you can go to Ohio State University's Knowledge Bank and look up Logan Elm Press, and there's about 85% of the Logan Elm Press that's represented there. And everyone has an accompanying colophon, which explains the history and background of the number of copies and how it was made and so forth. Anyway, so.
Well, thank you for sharing. It's been very interesting to hear your passion about your craft and the history of your craft, and it's been really interesting. And I'm so happy to have seen these in person, because it's really something else.
Well, these are just a few. We have many other things that I didn't bring. I brought the biggest ones.
Yeah, you need a book for all your books.
Yeah.
To keep all your.
Well, we did a digital version.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Where's that? Is that online? Do you have something?
That's online. It's the Ohio State University Knowledge Bank. Logan Elm Press, digital catalog raisonné.
And director is Robert Tauber.
Robert Tauber. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks
I
for sitting
appreciate
down
it.
with us.
Now, you're going to spread this interview in every schoolyard in the nation now, right?
Well, what we'll do is we'll put it online, and then, unfortunately, the big draw now is like little short clips. So I'll probably take little clips of everything that we've done, chop it up, and then some of these clips, like.
Well, you'll send me a copy when it's done.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
As long as people don't call and want to borrow money, I'm good.
No, I could say the same.